At the will reading, the attorney announced I was left a dilapidated house and $10. The room erupted in laughter. My father sneered, "You threw away your time on a penniless old man. Now you get a pile of junk." I just smiled, walked out. Then, the serial number on that bill pointed me to a truth that made my dad collapse in fear. Can you imagine finding out the man you loved most in this world, your quiet, bookish grandpa, wasn't who you thought he was? What if his hidden past not only shattered your entire perception of him, but also exposed the deep, ugly truth about your own family? A truth so dark, it threatened to tear everything apart. My name is Eli, and I'm about to tell you how my grandpa's secret turned my world and my family completely upside down. See, I'm 29, living a pretty simple life in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's not a huge city, just quiet streets, old red brick buildings, and the smell of crisp autumn air. I'm an archivist at the local university library. My job isn't glamorous, and it definitely doesn't make me rich, but I absolutely love it. There's something magical about those old books, the way history, especially the Cold War, unfolds in my hands like a mysterious novel. But to my family? Oh, to them, I'm practically a failure. Eli, you're still living off that pathetic salary? My cousin Jake would sneer at every family gathering, a smirk permanently etched on his face. He'd look at me like I was some alien creature, an anomaly among the Callahans. Because, you see, I'm the only one who didn't chase money or fame. My father, Thomas Callahan, is a real estate mogul. My Uncle Dan, his younger brother, is his polished, expensive suit-wearing right-hand man. They swim in a world of million-dollar deals, shiny cars, and lavish parties. And me? I'm just me. The guy in the worn-out sweater, driving an old car, preferring quiet evenings with books over talk of stocks and property. Our family gatherings are always in opulent rooms with sparkling chandeliers. My cousins Jake, Emily, Sarah, they'd be there, loudly bragging about their European vacations, designer watches, or new apartments. I was usually the quiet one in the corner, pouring water, clearing plates, listening. No one ever bothered to ask me a single question. Eli, what do you even do in that library all day? Organize books, huh? The job of the century. Emily once scoffed, and the whole table erupted in a symphony of cruel laughter. I just smiled, nodded, and kept clearing the table. I'd grown used to being pushed to the sidelines, feeling invisible. But there was one place, where I never felt like an outsider, my grandparents' old wooden house. Tucked away near the Allegheny forest, it smelled of damp wood and a lifetime of memories. Grandpa Walt, my Walter Edmund Callahan, was a tall man, though time had bent his back and turned his hair snow white. He always had an old book in his gnarled hands, or a cup of black coffee. And Grandma Maggie? She was the kindest woman I'd ever known, her eyes shining with endless patience. Together, they were like an old painting, quiet, but full of life. My family, they barely noticed my grandparents. To them, Grandpa was just an old man stuck in the past, with nothing valuable except a crumbling house and a few acres of land. My father once said, the old man's got nothing to leave behind. Don't expect anything. His whole life was just reading books and telling war stories. Uncle Dan added, with that sickening smirk, such a waste of land. That place could fetch a few million if sold. My heart tightened, but Grandpa never responded. He just sat, staring out the window, lost in a world none of us understood. But for me, Grandpa was an entire world. Every weekend, I'd drive my old car, bringing pastries or medicine, and just be with them. I loved sitting by the fireplace, listening to his stories. Tales of war, soldiers, secrets buried under the dust of time. His voice was low, deliberate, and every word seemed to carve itself into my mind. He loved history, especially the Cold War. I'd bring him books about the CIA, KGB, espionage. Eli, do you know? He once said, his eyes lighting up. This world is full of secrets. Some people live their entire lives and no one knows what they did to change history. Grandma would smile, pretending to scold him. Don't confuse the boy with your stories. But I knew she loved them too. Those afternoons in that old house, with the crackling fire and the scent of baked goods, made me feel like I belonged. I didn't need an expensive car or my family's approval. I just needed Grandpa to be healthy, Grandma to keep smiling, and their warm stories on those cold winter days. My mother, Susan, was the only other one who never mocked me. She was a quiet woman, with sad eyes and light brown hair always in a bun. In the Callahan family, she was a shadow, always overshadowed by Dad and Uncle Dan. She never argued, never spoke up when they ridiculed me, but I knew she loved me. Sometimes, when it was just us, she'd hold my hand and say, "Eli, you don't have to be like them. You just have to be yourself." In those moments, I felt like she was trying to protect me from a world she herself couldn't escape. Life went on like that until one late autumn evening when everything began to change. It was freezing, and I was visiting my grandparents as usual. Grandpa sat by the fireplace, holding a book, but his eyes were different. He looked at me, not with his usual smile, but with a deep, searching gaze, like he was trying to read my soul. Grandma had gone to bed, leaving just us and the crackling fire. "Eli," he suddenly said, his voice low, deadly serious. "If there's a secret that could change the way you see this entire family, would you want to know?" I looked up surprised. Grandpa told stories, but never anything this serious. I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Grandpa, are you telling spy stories again?" "I know you love that stuff," but he didn't smile. His eyes, under the flickering firelight, gleamed strangely, looking through me. "I'm not joking, Eli," he said, soft but firm. "There are things I've kept hidden my whole life. But maybe the time for you to know everything is coming." A chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from his voice. I wanted to ask more, but he just shook his head and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're the only one I trust, Eli. Remember that." That night, driving home, his words haunted me. A secret? Something that could change how I see the family? I tried to tell myself he was just getting old, talking nonsense. But deep down, I knew Grandpa never said anything without a reason. And that look in his eyes, it wasn't the look of a confused old man. It was the look of someone preparing to entrust something monumental. Autumn in Harrisburg passed quickly. Golden leaves blanketed the roads, but with the season, Grandpa's health declined. One day, I found him by the fireplace, breathing heavily, paler than usual. Grandma, her silver hair neatly tied, her hands trembling, was brewing tea. "He's been coughing all week," she said, her voice laced with worry, but trying to stay calm. "The doctor says it's pneumonia, but he refuses to go to the hospital. He insists on staying here." I looked at Grandpa. The man who was once tall and strong, now worn down by time. His threadbare sweater seemed looser on his frame, and his eyes, though still bright, carried a hint of exhaustion. I knelt, taking his hand. "Grandpa, you have to see a doctor." "I'll take you." He shook his head, giving me a faint smile. "Eli, I'm old. I don't need a hospital. I just need to be here with your grandmother. And with you." He squeezed my hand lightly. It was warm, but much weaker than before. I wanted to argue, to convince him, but his eyes silenced me. They weren't the eyes of someone giving up, but of someone quietly accepting the inevitable. From that day, I visited more often, sometimes taking entire days off work to stay overnight. I brought medicine, cooked soup, helped Grandma clean. On those nights, I'd sit by him, listening to his stories. But they weren't about wars or spies anymore. He began talking about his own life, his youth, journeys he'd never described in detail. "Eli, have you ever thought that a person could live two lives?" he asked one evening, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his face. "Two lives?" I repeated, unsure. He nodded, staring into the flames. "One life that everyone sees, and another that only the person themselves knows. Some things have to be buried deep, because if they're revealed, they could destroy everything." His words sent a chill through me. I wanted to ask more, but Grandma walked in with cookies, and he shifted to talking about her baking. I smiled, but inside, his words were a stone dropped into a still lake, creating ripples that wouldn't stop. While I cared for Grandpa, the rest of my family seemed utterly indifferent. My father, Thomas, was busy with new real estate deals, flying to New York or Chicago. Uncle Dan was constantly in the papers, boasting about their latest purchase in downtown Harrisburg. My cousins, of course, were caught up in their lavish parties, exotic trips, and new cars. That Thanksgiving, not one of them visited. My father called, a few cursory words. "Is your grandpa okay?" "I'm swamped. Maybe I'll stop by next week." He never did. Uncle Dan sent an expensive gift basket, but not a single word of concern. My cousins didn't even bother to call. Only Mom and I visited. She brought a roasted turkey, I brought ginger cookies. We sat around the old wooden table. Grandpa coughed more than usual, but he still smiled, telling stories about Thanksgivings when Dad and Uncle Dan were kids. "Back then, those two boys would fight over the biggest slice of pumpkin pie," he said, his eyes distant. I looked at Mom. She gave a sad smile. I knew she felt their loneliness too, but she said nothing. My mother was always like that, as if she'd learned to accept her place. In the months that followed, Grandpa's health worsened. The pneumonia wouldn't improve. The doctor warned he might not make it through winter. I started staying at their house more often, sometimes sleeping on the old armchair. Grandma, frail herself, cared for him with a love I'd never seen. She stayed up at night, placed warm cloths on his forehead, brewed tea. But I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew he was slipping away. One night, as Grandpa's coughing kept him awake, I sat by his bedside, holding his hand. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting a silvery glow over his face. He looked at me, his eyes clouded by illness, but still sharp. "Eli," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "Don't trust what you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." "What place, Grandpa?" I asked, my heart pounding. This was the second time he'd said something so cryptic. He squeezed my hand, stronger than I thought he could. "You'll know," he said. "Just remember, you're the only one I trust. Don't let them blind you." I wanted to press him, but he broke into a long coughing fit and Grandma hurried in. She looked at me, her eyes saying, "Don't push him." I nodded, but inside, his words were a small flame, smoldering, impossible to extinguish. In the days that followed, I started noticing small details. Once, while helping Grandma clean, I spotted an old wooden box in the living room, locked with a small padlock. "What's this, Grandma?" I asked. She just smiled and shook her head. "It's your grandfather's. Best to leave it alone." I didn't press, but I couldn't forget that box, its surface scratched as if it had traveled through decades of history. Grandpa's final days passed quietly. He didn't talk much, but every time I visited, he'd hold my hand, as if passing on invisible strength. Grandma stayed by his side, never leaving him. My family, as usual, remained absent. Dad called once, asked a few questions, then quickly ended the call. And then, the fateful night came. As I sat by his side, Grandpa opened his eyes and looked at me one last time. "Eli," he whispered, his voice so faint I had to lean close to hear. "I'm proud of you." Those were his final words to me. The next morning, he passed away as quietly as he had lived. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, feeling the last of his warmth fade. Grandma stood beside me, not crying, only gently stroking his hair. I knew she was in pain, but she was stronger than I'd ever imagined. "Your grandfather lived a long life, Eli," she said, her voice trembling. "And he loved you more than anyone." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. But amidst the grief, Grandpa's words echoed, "Don't trust what you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." I knew my journey was only just beginning. Grandpa's funeral was on a cold, drizzly day. The sky was gray, raindrops streaked the windows, as if the world wept for him. I stood in a corner, in an old black suit that was too tight. My mind was still reeling from Grandpa's warm voice, his sharp eyes, his cryptic words. My family showed up in full force. My father, impeccable in his sleek suit, his face stern, but unable to hide a hint of impatience. Uncle Dan, with his silk tie, whispering to someone important. My cousins, Jake, Emily, Sarah, clustered, chatting and glancing at their phones. None of them seemed genuinely grieving. To them, it felt like a formality. My mother stood close to me, quietly holding my hand. Her eyes were red but tearless. I knew she was holding back, not wanting my father or anyone else to see her vulnerability. Grandma sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief, gazing at a photo of Grandpa from his youth. I wondered what she was thinking. Did she know about that place? Did she carry his secrets too? The funeral was brief. The priest described Grandpa as a simple man who loved his family. I wanted to stand up, to shout that he was more, that he taught me about history, honesty, about living right. But I stayed silent. I knew no one in that room cared about Grandpa the way I did. Afterward, the family went to an upscale restaurant for the reception. I didn't want to go, but Mom insisted. Eli, you have to be there for Grandpa. I nodded. All I wanted was to go back to the wooden house, sit by the fireplace, and remember. The restaurant was all glass walls overlooking the Susquehanna River, white silk tables. People laughed, clinked glasses, talked about work, real estate, vacations. No one mentioned Grandpa except for a few perfunctory remarks. He passed peacefully, didn't he? He was old. It was his time. I sat at the end of the table, eating cold soup, listening to conversations I didn't belong to. Jake bragged about his Tesla. Emily showed off a designer handbag. My father and Uncle Dan discussed a new project. That land is gold, Dad said, his eyes gleaming. Just need to sort out a few issues with the city council and we'll be rolling in it. Uncle Dan smirked. I looked at them, wondering if they truly knew how Grandpa had lived, what he thought, what he'd left behind. Grandma didn't come. She wanted to stay at the funeral home, then return to the house. Mom insisted I go with the family. She needs time alone, Eli. I understood. But I couldn't shake the emptiness. Grandpa was gone, and I felt like I was losing a part of myself. A few days later, Grandpa's lawyer, Harold Steinberg, contacted the family for the will reading. Steinberg was a tall, thin man, with salt and pepper hair and a stern demeanor. The reading was in his office, a small, elegant room with wooden bookshelves. The entire family gathered, not with grief, but with an almost greedy anticipation. My father sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, his gaze sharp. Uncle Dan checked his watch. Jake, Emily, and Sarah whispered, giggling, like children waiting for Christmas presents. My mother sat next to me silent. Grandma wasn't there. She said she trusted Grandpa had done what was right. I sat in the corner, feeling more out of place than ever. I didn't expect anything. Grandpa wasn't wealthy, not in their way. Just the wooden house, a few acres, his books. But I hoped he'd left me something, not money, but a sign, an answer to his cryptic words. Steinberg began reading, his voice steady. Grandpa had divided small portions for his children and grandchildren. A bit of savings for Dad, Uncle Dan, a few keepsakes for my cousins. No one looked satisfied. That's it, Jake muttered loudly. Emily pouted. My father frowned. Uncle Dan shook his head, as if they'd expected hidden treasure. Then, Steinberg said, adjusting his glasses, looking directly at me, to my grandson, Elliot James Callahan, I leave the old property number 1417 and $10. The room fell silent. Then erupted in laughter. Jake burst out first, pointing. Old property number 1417? What's that? A pile of moldy books. Emily giggled. $10? The old man sure knew how to joke. Sarah's voice dripped with sarcasm. My father didn't laugh, but his eyes held a look of utter contempt. Uncle Dan smirked, muttering something to Dad. I sat there, feeling the ground give way beneath me. I didn't care about money, but why would Grandpa leave me something so meaningless? Old property number 1417. $10. I looked at Steinberg, hoping for an explanation. He just nodded, his expression stern, but revealing nothing more. That's it? My father asked, his voice cold. Nothing else. Steinberg shook his head. That's the entirety of the will. If there are no questions, I'll conclude the meeting. Chairs scraped against the floor, a grating sound in my ears. Jake clapped me on the shoulder, laughing loudly. Congrats, Eli. Now you're the proud owner of $10 and a pile of junk. Emily and Sarah laughed. My father gave me a single glance before leaving with Uncle Dan. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing. I left the law office feeling hollow. The rain still fell, soaking my coat. I wasn't angry at Grandpa. Never. But I was confused, disappointed, and above all, I felt like I'd missed something crucial. His words, "Don't trust what you see on the surface," they echoed in my mind like a puzzle without an answer. That evening, I drove to the wooden house. Grandma sat by the fireplace, knitting. She looked at me, a faint smile. "Eli, why are you here so late?" I sat beside her and recounted the will reading, my voice heavy. "I don't care about money, Grandma, but why would he leave me something so meaningless? Old property number 1417. $10. I don't understand." She stopped knitting, placed her frail hands on mine. "Eli," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Your grandfather never did anything without a reason. If he chose you, there's a purpose." She stood, went to the bedroom, and returned with a small, tarnished brass key. She placed it in my hand. "Your grandfather once said, the answers are there. Go to the old house, Eli. You'll find what he wanted you to know." I looked at the key, the cold metal sending a chill through my palm. My heart beat faster. "The old house?" I asked. "You mean property number 1417? She nodded, her eyes holding a secret she couldn't voice. "You'll know when you get there." She echoed Grandpa's words. "Trust him, Eli. And trust yourself." I left that night, the key heavy in my pocket. The rain had stopped, but the cold wind rustled through the oak trees, whispering something I couldn't yet understand. I knew I couldn't stop. Grandpa had left me a puzzle, and I had to find the solution. The days after the will reading, I felt like a ghost. My job at the library, where I once found peace, now made me restless. I sorted documents, answered questions, but my mind kept drifting to that brass key and the strange $10 bill in my wallet. I'd turned it over dozens of times. Just an old, crumpled piece of currency. Or was it? Grandma's words, "Your grandfather never did anything without a reason. The answers are there." But where was there? And what was old property number 1417? That weekend, I decided to dig deeper. I called Grandma. "Eli, your grandfather once mentioned a place. An old house in the suburbs near the old road leading to the river. He said it was where he kept important things. Try looking there. Maybe 1417 is connected to that." I hung up and started searching online. After a few hours, I found an old listing, 1417 Old River Road. A remote road in the suburbs near the Susquehanna River. No information about the house, only that it had been abandoned for years. A jolt of electricity ran through me. Could this be it? I stuffed the $10 bill and the key into my pocket, grabbed my backpack, and drove out of the city. Old River Road was winding, covered in dry leaves and overgrown weeds. The houses grew sparse, the landscape desolate. When I reached 1417, I could hardly believe my eyes. Before me stood a dilapidated wooden house, abandoned for decades. The roof sagged, windows were shattered, walls peeling. Weeds grew knee-high. A rusted "No Trespassing" sign hung loosely. I parked, a chill running down my spine. I stepped over the gate, carefully avoiding rotted boards. A cold wind blew, carrying the damp smell of earth. An eerie silence. I tried the brass key in the front door, but it didn't fit. The door was so decayed, a gentle push opened it, creaking like something out of a horror movie. Inside, the house was dark and cold. Thick dust coated the floor. The air was heavy with mold. Scattered remnants of furniture, a table with a broken leg, chairs draped in cobwebs, a shattered lamp. I turned on my phone's flashlight, illuminating every corner. It was small, a living room, tiny kitchen, 2 bedrooms. I checked each room, tapped on walls, lifted tattered rugs, hoping for a clue. Nothing. Just dust and silence. I started to wonder if I was chasing an illusion. Had Grandpa really left me a puzzle with no solution? I sank onto an old chair, trying to suppress my disappointment. I pulled out the $10 bill again, examining the serial number, J1417K890632. The number 1417 had led me here. But what about the rest? After nearly an hour, just as I was about to give up, my heel caught on a floorboard near the fireplace, producing a strange, hollow sound. I knelt, pried at it gently. The board was loose. When I pulled harder, it came free, revealing a small metal hatch with a combination lock. My heart pounded. A hidden cellar in an abandoned house no one knew Grandpa owned. I looked at the $10 bill. If 1417 was the code, I'd try it. I entered 1-4-1-7 into the lock. A soft click sounded, and the hatch popped open. I trembled, not from the cold, but from a mix of excitement and fear. What had Grandpa hidden here? And why had he chosen me to find it? I stood there, staring down the narrow wooden staircase leading into darkness. My flashlight illuminated only the first few steps. Below was a pitch-black void. The air rising from the cellar was cold and damp, carrying the scent of old earth and rusted metal. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Grandpa, what do you want me to do here?" I whispered, as if he were still somewhere, guiding me. There was no answer, only the whistle of wind through the hatch, like a warning. I descended carefully, each step creaking. Every step felt like it was pulling me deeper into a secret I wasn't ready to face. At the bottom, I swept my flashlight around. The cellar was small, no larger than a storage room, with stained concrete walls and an old wooden table in the center. On the table sat a small safe with a combination lock, a metal box without a lock, and a stack of dusty documents. An old oil lamp hung on the wall, but I didn't dare light it. I approached the table, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I tried entering 1-4-1-7 into the safe, hoping it would work again. The lock didn't budge. I glanced at the $10 bill again. The serial number, J1417K890632. I tried the remaining digits, 8-9-6-3. A sharp click sounded. The safe opened. I could barely breathe. Grandpa had planned everything, step by step, leading me here. Inside the safe was a thick bundle of documents tied with a leather cord, a black leather-bound notebook, and a small silver USB drive. I picked up the notebook first, flipping through the pages. Grandpa's handwriting was firm and neat, recording names, dates, locations, strange symbols I couldn't decipher. There were communication diagrams, maps of Eastern Europe with marked points, notes about operations with names like Blue Horizon and Shadow Relay. One page read clearly, *Berlin, December 3rd, 1978. Met K at rendezvous. Defection successful. I turned the page and found a black and white photo taped inside. A younger grandpa in a suit, standing beside a stranger in a military uniform. A handwritten caption below read, Operation Blue Horizon. CIA, CIA. The words sent a chill through me. I shook my head, trying to process it. Grandpa Walt. The man in the threadbare sweater, sitting by the fireplace, telling history stories. He was a spy? A character from the espionage tales he used to share with me? I couldn't believe it, but these pages, written in his hand, couldn't be fake. I moved to the bundle of documents. Inside were contracts stamped with government seals, some declassified, titled, Strategic Coordinator for European Operations, 1974-1988. Grandpa's name, Walter Edmund Callahan, was printed clearly, along with details of operations in East Germany, Poland, and Hungary. One document stated, W. Callahan, codename Falcon, responsible for coordinating a network of operatives in Eastern Europe. My head spun. Grandpa wasn't just a history enthusiast. He was part of history. A man behind covert operations, defections, and schemes that shaped the world. But what stunned me most was the small metal box beside the safe. I opened it to find another thinner file and a small hard drive labeled WC Personal. The file was titled, Thomas Callahan and Daniel Callahan. My heart stopped. My father and Uncle Dan. I flipped through it quickly, finding copies of invoices, contracts, and Grandpa's handwritten notes. One page read, TC and DC suspected money laundering through Bright Future Charity, 2018-2023. Another listed real estate transactions with mismatched figures, accompanied by a note, links to state officials. Fraudulent contracts. There were even copies of emails between Dad and Uncle Dan, discussing a plan to transfer funds through offshore accounts. I sank to the cellar floor, my hands trembling. Grandpa had been watching Dad and Uncle Dan. He knew they were doing something wrong. I kept flipping and found a carefully folded handwritten letter in Grandpa's script. I opened it, reading each line. Asterisk Eli, if you're reading this letter, it means you found the seller. I'm sorry for placing this burden on your shoulders, but you're the only one I trust. I've lived 2 lives, one the man the family knew and one the world could never know. But the most painful thing isn't the secrets I kept from the war, but what I discovered about my 2 sons. Asterisk, I've been watching Thomas and Daniel for years. Ever since I suspected their company was involved in shady activities, I found evidence of money laundering, collusion with officials, and a fake charity to hide illegal profits. I wrote a report, intending to send it to the authorities, but I couldn't. They're my sons, Eli. I didn't want them in prison. Didn't want the family torn apart. But I also couldn't let their crimes continue. I leave this decision to you. On the hard drive, you'll find a video I recorded explaining everything. If you think they still have a chance to turn back, give them that chance. But if they choose the wrong path, do the right thing, Eli. Be strong as I've always believed you could be. I'm proud of you. Grandpa Walt. Asterisk tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. Grandpa had carried this burden alone his entire life. He knew my father and uncle had gone astray, but he couldn't bring himself to destroy them. Instead, he passed it to me. A burden, but also a profound trust. I wiped my tears and picked up the hard drive. I needed to watch that video, to hear Grandpa's voice explain it all. As I climbed the stairs, I felt like I was no longer the Eli from a few hours ago. This cellar had changed everything. Grandpa wasn't just a simple man. He was a spy, a silent hero, and he knew about my father's and uncle's crimes. But he was also a father, unable to destroy his own sons. And now he'd entrusted that impossible responsibility to me. I left the abandoned house at 1417 Old River Road in the dark, my backpack heavy. The letter, notebook, and hard drive were tucked inside, but they felt like stones pressing against my chest. Even so, I needed to verify what I had found. I needed someone who understood history, the Cold War, to help me comprehend who Grandpa truly was. The next morning, I drove to the university library. I knew one person who could help, Dr. Leonard Brooks, a history professor specializing in the Cold War. He was a man in his 60s, with disheveled silver hair and glasses that always slid down his nose. I'd met him a few times, and we'd talked about espionage, the KGB, the CIA. If anyone could make sense of the documents from the cellar, it was Dr. Brooks. I brought the leather-bound notebook and a few photos, carefully wrapped. I didn't bring everything, fearing that if someone discovered them, I might be in trouble. When I stepped into Dr. Brooks's office, he was seated among stacks of books, a quill pen in hand. He looked up and smiled. Eli, what a surprise. How can I help you? I hesitated, placing the notebook and photos on his desk. Dr. Brooks, these are something I found. I think they're related to the Cold War, but I'm not sure. Can you help me figure them out? He raised an eyebrow, picked up the notebook, and flipped through a few pages. His eyes widened. He adjusted his glasses, reading more closely. Where did you get this, Eli? His voice suddenly turned serious. I told a condensed version of the truth, that I found it among my grandfather's belongings, that he loved history and might have been involved in something significant. I didn't mention the CIA or my father and uncle, just enough to avoid suspicion. Dr. Brooks continued flipping, pausing at a page with coded symbols. This is standard CIA cipher, he murmured, almost to himself. He picked up a photo, the one of Grandpa in Berlin in 1978, and froze. Do you realize what you're holding, Eli? These ciphers, the way the notes are structured, the diagrams, this isn't ordinary documentation. This is government-level material, the kind only someone with high clearance would have access to. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. What do you mean? He looked at me, his gaze sharp. If these belong to your grandfather, Walter Callahan, then he wasn't just a history enthusiast. He could have been a major figure, very major, in intelligence operations. There's a note here. He pointed to a photo about a covert operative who disappeared in 1978. If your grandfather was involved in this, he could have been a coordinator or even a regional commander. My head spun. What Dr. Brooks said aligned with the documents in the cellar, strategic coordinator for European operations, but hearing it from someone else, an expert, made it feel more real, more terrifying. Are you sure? I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Brooks nodded, flipping through more pages. These ciphers are internal CIA communication codes. And this photo, he pointed to a group shot, mentions Operation Blue Horizon. I've read about that operation. If your grandfather was Falcon, as the documents suggest, he didn't just participate. He could have been running an entire CIA network. I sank into a chair, feeling as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Grandpa, the man in a worn sweater telling stories by the fireplace, was a CIA commander. I remembered the afternoons when he spoke about the Cold War, his eyes lighting up as he described nameless spies. It turned out he wasn't just telling stories. He was reliving his own memories. Can you check further? I asked. I mean, to confirm this is real? Dr. Brooks nodded. I have a contact at the National Archives. They have declassified records on Cold War operations. I can send them some details from this notebook without mentioning you or your grandfather to verify. But Eli, you need to understand that if this is real, you're holding something that could cause serious trouble. Even declassified documents like these can attract unwanted attention. I nodded, unease rising within me. I understand, but I need to know the truth. Grandpa trusted me, and I have to find out why. Dr. Brooks agreed, promising to contact his friend and get back to me. He handed me the notebook and photos, urging me to keep them safe. Don't let anyone know you have these, Eli, he said, his tone grave. Not everyone will be happy you possess them. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Brooks had said. Grandpa was Falcon, a CIA commander, a silent hero. But he was also a father, heartbroken over his son's crimes. His letter echoed in my mind. Asterisk, if they still have a chance to turn back, give them that chance. But if they choose to continue their crimes, I leave the decision to you. Asterisk, the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than ever. My father and Uncle Dan, the ones who always saw me as useless, were living off dirty money. And I was the only one who knew the truth. I got home, locked the door, and carefully hid the backpack in a concealed corner of my closet. I didn't dare let anyone see these documents. Not my mother, not Grandma, and certainly not Dad or Uncle Dan. But I knew I couldn't stop. Grandpa had chosen me, and I had to do the right thing, even if it meant confronting my own family. The days after meeting Dr. Brooks were filled with constant tension. Every noise, every text made me jump. The documents, the notebook, the letter, the hard drive felt like ticking time bombs. Dr. Brooks had warned me, these things could cause big trouble. Eli, be careful. I knew he was right, but I couldn't just sit still. Grandpa's letter echoed, do the right thing. My father, Thomas Callahan, was a stern, patriarchal man who always saw me as a failure. Uncle Dan, with his slick smile and cunning mind, was even more intimidating. I knew they wouldn't listen easily, but I had to try, for Grandpa and for myself. I decided to meet them at my father's office in downtown Harrisburg. Callahan and Sons Real Estate was a sleek glass building. I rarely came here. The last time was years ago, when Dad tried to convince me to quit my library job. I arrived on a rainy afternoon, carrying copies of a few documents from the cellar. Just enough to prove I knew the truth, but not everything. I didn't want them to know about the hard drive or Grandpa's video. Not yet. When I entered the meeting room, Dad was at the head of the table. Uncle Dan stood by the window, phone to his ear, his voice smooth. Both looked up. I immediately felt the cold weight of Dad's stare. Eli, what are you doing here? He asked, his tone barely concealing irritation. Don't you know to call first? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I need to talk to you and Uncle Dan. About the company. And about Grandpa. Uncle Dan hung up, smirking. Grandpa? Why are you bringing up the old man now? He left you $10, didn't he? He laughed loudly as if it were the funniest joke. I didn't return his smile. I placed the documents on the table, opening to the first page, a copy of an invoice from the Bright Future charity with mismatched figures, accompanied by Grandpa's handwritten note, "Suspected money laundering 2020. I found some things among Grandpa's belongings, I said, my voice steady but firm. These show that your company is doing something wrong. Money laundering, fraudulent contracts with state officials, a fake charity. The room fell silent. Dad stared at the document, his face darkening. Uncle Dan stepped forward, grabbed the paper, skimmed it, and tossed it back onto the table. What the hell are you talking about, Eli? He growled, his voice thick with anger. You think you can waltz in here with some nonsense papers and accuse us? I'm not accusing, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I just want you and Dad to stop. To make things right before it goes too far. Grandpa knew everything. He'd been watching you for years. He didn't go public because he didn't want you both in prison, but he left these to me, and he told me to do the right thing. Dad stood, his hands slamming onto the table, his eyes burning into me. You dare talk about the right thing, he shouted. You, a library clerk, living off a pitiful salary, dare stand here and lecture me on how to run my business? Your grandfather was a stubborn old fool, and so are you. These are fake, Eli. Fake. You think you can tear down this family with a few pieces of paper? They're not fake, I replied, my voice rising more than I intended. I have proof, Dad. Invoices, emails, transactions, and more. I just want you and Uncle Dan to stop. To dissolve the fake charity. To return what doesn't belong to you. I don't want to take this public. Uncle Dan sneered, stepping closer. You're threatening us, Eli? Who do you think you are? Some kid with a few papers and a hero complex? I'll sue you for defamation. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your reputation, everything. I felt the blood rush to my head, but I stood my ground. I'm not trying to be a hero, I said. I'm just doing what Grandpa believed I could. He gave me a chance to talk to you first. But if you and Dad don't listen, I won't stop. Dad stepped toward me, pointing a finger in my face. You dare, he roared. Do you know what this would do? It would destroy this family. Destroy the company Dan and I built from nothing. Stop this nonsense. I looked straight into his eyes, feeling for the first time in my life that I wasn't small before him. If you and Uncle Dan won't change, I'll have no choice but to expose the truth to the public. Uncle Dan laughed loudly, but the sound didn't hide the tension in his eyes. You're crazy, Eli. Completely crazy. You think you can take us on? We have money, connections, power. You're just a nobody. I didn't respond. I gathered the documents, stuffed them back into my backpack, and left. As I stepped outside, the rain soaked my coat. I heard Dad shouting something from inside, but I didn't turn back. I had given them a chance, just as Grandpa wanted. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't stop. And I also knew that my next step would change everything. I drove home through the rain, my mind flooded with their scornful words, their shouts. I had hoped they would listen, admit their mistakes. But I was wrong. Not only did they refuse, they threatened me, treating me like a problem to be eliminated. But they didn't know I had seen too much, understood too much, and I carried Grandpa's promise, do the right thing. Back in my apartment, I sat at the table, staring at my backpack, at the documents, the hard drive, Grandpa's letter. I pulled out the photo of him in Berlin in 1978, gazing at his sharp eyes. He had lived a life full of secrets and responsibilities, but he never turned his back on the truth. I knew I couldn't do otherwise. Deciding to expose the truth wasn't easy. I wasn't just facing my father and uncle, but the entire Callahan family. They would turn against me, despise me. But I had no other choice. I opened my laptop, plugged in the hard drive, and watched Grandpa's video again. His warm, steady voice felt like it was speaking directly to me. Asterisk, if they choose the wrong path, do the right thing, Eli. I trust you. Asterisk, I wiped away tears, picked up my phone, and called Harold Steinberg, Grandpa's lawyer. Eli? Steinberg's voice came through, calm as always. What's going on? I need to meet you, I said. I found some things from Grandpa. Important things. I need your help to get them to the right people. Steinberg was silent for a moment. Then he replied, "All right. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning." The next morning, I brought everything: the documents, the hard drive, the notebook. I told him everything. The seller, Grandpa's CIA past, the undeniable evidence against my father and Uncle Dan. He listened, nodded, reviewed the documents with absolute focus. "Are you sure you want to do this, Eli?" he asked, his gaze stern. "If you hand these over to the press and the Department of Justice, there's no turning back. Your family won't forgive you." I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. "I know. But Grandpa trusted me. I have to do the right thing." Steinberg agreed, promising to contact a trusted investigative reporter and forward the documents to the Department of Justice. "You've done the right thing, Eli," he said. "But brace yourself. A storm is coming." A week later, everything exploded. The first article appeared in the Harrisburg Times, headlined, "Callahan and Sons Real Estate Accused of Money Laundering and Fraud." It cited documents from an anonymous source, detailing the fake charity, illegal transactions, ties to state officials. The company's stock plummeted that same day. Police raided my father's and Uncle Dan's offices, freezing their bank accounts. Both were summoned for hearings. My family was in chaos. Jake called, screaming at me, "What have you done, Eli? You've destroyed this family." Emily and Sarah sent furious texts, calling me a traitor. Dad didn't call, but Uncle Dan sent a message, "You'll regret this, Eli." Only my mother stood by me. One evening, she showed up at my apartment, her eyes red. "You did the right thing, Eli," she said, her voice trembling. "But you're going to suffer for it." I didn't defend myself. I only said, "I just did what Grandpa believed I could do." Mom nodded, hugged me, and left. I knew she was caught in the middle, between me and Dad, between love and loyalty. The family turned their backs on me. Aunts, uncles, cousins, they cut off contact. I became the enemy, the one who dismantled the Callahan empire. But I didn't regret it. Every time I looked at Grandpa's photo, I felt him beside me, smiling. The weeks following the article's publication engulfed Harrisburg in a media storm. TV, newspapers, social media posts buzzed incessantly about the Callahan and Sons scandal. My father's and Uncle Dan's faces were everywhere, news reports, angry status updates. Their company collapsed swiftly, accounts frozen, major contracts canceled. I heard they'd hired the best lawyers, but the evidence from Grandpa's hard drive was too clear, too detailed. They couldn't deny it. I didn't follow the news much. Every headline felt like a knife, reminding me that I had set this in motion. Not because I wanted to destroy my family, but because I wanted to do what Grandpa believed I could. Yet, that didn't ease the pain in my heart. I was lonelier than ever. Grandma, though she still loved me, seemed too exhausted to face what was happening. "You did the right thing, Eli," she said over the phone, her voice frail. "But let me have some peace for a while." I understood. She had lost Grandpa, and now her family was unraveling. I didn't blame her. One morning, as I sat in my apartment staring at Grandpa's 1978 Berlin photo, my phone rang. It was Harold Steinberg. "Eli, you need to come to my office now," he said, his voice serious, but tinged with excitement. "There's a part of the will I haven't disclosed. It concerns you." I was stunned. Another part of the will? I thought everything had been revealed. The $10 and old property number 1417. But Steinberg's tone made me feel this was no small matter. I drove to his office, a mix of curiosity and anxiety swirling within me. When I walked in, Steinberg was seated behind his desk, a thick stack of documents in front of him. He smiled, a rare sight for someone as stern as he was. "Eli," he began, "your grandfather, Walter Callahan, was an extraordinary man. And he left you something far greater than what your family knows." I sat down, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I found the seller, the documents, everything." Steinberg slid the stack of documents toward me. "This is your grandfather's hidden estate. During his time with the CIA, he amassed a significant fortune. Not from illegal activities, but from savvy investments, overseas properties, and shares in a Silicon Valley tech company." He paused, letting the words sink in. The estimated total value? Hundreds of millions of dollars. I was speechless, unable to process it. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Grandpa, the man in a threadbare sweater, living in an old wooden house, was that wealthy? I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. But why didn't he tell anyone? Why did he live like that? Steinberg gave a sad smile. Your grandfather didn't care about money, Eli. He chose to live simply because that's who he was. But he wanted this fortune to be used for good. And he left it all to you. With one condition. What condition? I asked, my voice trembling. Steinberg opened a page in the documents and read aloud. Asterisk, the entire estate is to be transferred to Elliot James Callahan on the condition that he uses a portion to establish an educational fund for underprivileged children. A dream Walter Callahan never had the chance to fulfill. The remainder is for Elliot to use freely, but in accordance with the conscience and values his grandfather believed in. Asterisk, tears welled up in my eyes. Grandpa hadn't just left money. He'd left a mission. A true legacy, not just for me, but for people he'd never met. I remembered the afternoons when he spoke about the importance of education, how he wanted every child to have a chance to learn. It wasn't just talk. It was his lifelong plan. I wiped my tears and looked at Steinberg. I understand, sir, I said, my voice choked. I'll do what Grandpa wanted. Steinberg nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're a good man, Eli. Your grandfather knew that, and I believe you'll use this fortune wisely. I left the office, my mind reeling with numbers and new responsibilities. But more than that, I felt a deeper connection to Grandpa. He wasn't just a spy, a silent hero. He was a man with a vision, someone who wanted to leave the world better than he found it. And he had trusted me to carry on that dream. In the months that followed, I began fulfilling Grandpa's wishes. I established the Walter Callahan Education Fund for underprivileged children in Harrisburg and surrounding areas. I hired experts to manage the fund, ensuring every dollar went toward building schools, providing scholarships, and supporting kids who otherwise wouldn't have a chance. But I wanted to do more. I wanted the world to know about Grandpa. Not just as Walter Callahan, the simple man in the wooden house, but as Falcon, the silent hero of the Cold War. I used part of the estate to purchase a small building in downtown Harrisburg, transforming it into an exhibit called The Secret History of a Great Citizen. I displayed declassified documents from the cellar, photos of Grandpa in Berlin, a replica of his notebook. I didn't reveal sensitive details, but it was enough to show people how extraordinary his life had been. The exhibit was free, and every day I saw students, scholars, and locals visit, reading about Grandpa, marveling at his story. A year later, I took Grandma for a walk in the park near the exhibit. She had aged, but her eyes lit up when she saw Grandpa's name on the large sign. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Eli, she said, squeezing my hand. I smiled, feeling as though Grandpa was with us, watching from somewhere. My family never forgave me. Jake, Emily, Sarah, other relatives, they never reached out again. Dad and Uncle Dan faced hearings, and though they hadn't been convicted yet, Callahan and Sons had completely collapsed. Mom stayed in touch, but rarely spoke about Dad. I knew she was hurting, caught between loyalty and truth. Standing in front of the exhibit one autumn afternoon, I reflected on my journey. I had lost my family, but I had found a greater purpose. Grandpa taught me that the truth, however painful, is worth fighting for. His legacy wasn't just money or secrets. It was trust, integrity, and hope for a better world. I live by the message he left me, live true to your conscience, even if the world turns its back on you. The truth may be buried, but it will always find a way to rise. That was the greatest lesson Grandpa left me, and I will live by it every day. So, if you were me, facing down your own family, with a secret that could destroy everything but also build something new, what would you have done? Would you have kept quiet? Or would you have fought for the truth, no matter the cost? I really want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below.